Okay, welcome to another video in the horse owner series. Again, my name is Paul Conroy, I'm a farrier, and today I want to talk to you about laminitis. It's summer now, so I thought I would do this video as a sort of a guide to help you understand laminitis better. I promise I will try to keep the technical stuff to an absolute minimum. I won't use any long words if I don't have to, but please appreciate that laminitis is an incredibly complicated disease. There are books written on the subject, so to try and condense it down is going to be quite difficult, and I am going to miss bits out that aren't necessarily, it's not that they're not relevant, but then you don't need to understand them at a deep level. So that's the plan. How successful I am, we shall see. Okay, so laminitis. So what is laminitis? So if we break the word laminitis down into two, it breaks down into lamin and itis. Lamin meaning laminae and itis meaning inflammation of. So laminitis is inflammation of the sensitive laminae. So if we pick our hoof up, what we're talking about is this area of the hoof here. We have sensitive laminae that grow off this bone, and we have insensitive laminae that grow on the back of the hoof, and they dovetail together, sort of like that. Okay, they dovetail together, and they're a really strong bond. Chris Pollitt states that these leaves, if you spread them out, each foot, if you spread them out into a surface area, it's about the same surface area as a small adult human skin. So there is a large surface area of these laminae all the way around the hooves. They're incredibly important. On the internal and external structures video that I did, we talked about the deep digital flexor tendon here that's constantly pulling. Okay, and with laminitis, the bone will rotate downwards in the hoof because of the pull of this. So what happens is inflammation of the sensitive laminae, you get inflammation in this area of the hoof. Okay, so speaking as a farrier, and every other farrier, your farrier as well, is hitting your hammer on your thumb. If ever you've hit your thumb or finger with a hammer, think back to what that feels like. It really hurts, to the point where you can't even think the pain is so intense. You just got to go away and be on your own in a world of hurt. Now imagine hitting your thumb with a hammer and then placing all your weight, all your body weight on that thumb. Okay, the pain that you feel, the throbbing that you feel, is pressure, and it's pressure underneath your nail bed. And that's what the horse is feeling. But the difference is you can lift your finger up and not bear any weight on it. The horse has to bear its entire weight. It's an incredibly painful disease, and these animals really do suffer with it. It's horrible to see them suffering with laminitis. The pain is coming from this region here, okay, and we've got massive inflammation in this area. And because the inflammation is trapped between the bone and the hoof, it's got nowhere to go. Much like a tooth abscess. Any of you who've ever had a tooth abscess will sort of vouch for that. It's a pain that you can't get away from. It's constantly there because it's trapped against an unyielding structure, in this case bone and hoof, and that's why horses are in so much pain when it comes to laminitis. So that is what laminitis means at a basic level. There are two types of laminitis. They are systemic laminitis and mechanical laminitis. If we transport ourselves back 100 years, maybe a bit longer now, Victorian times, when horses were used as male horses, carriage horses, they were used a hell of a lot, then the type of laminitis that you saw, you didn't really see systemic laminitis at all. It was all mechanical laminitis. And mechanical laminitis is when the stress inside the hoof and the concussion from working on hard surfaces cause the laminae to become inflamed. So otherwise healthy laminae become inflamed because they're being overloaded and overworked. If a horse gets laminitis that way, it would be classed as mechanical laminitis, what we call mechanical laminitis. These days, very few horses do that much work. Horses have evolved now to being a leisure, pleasure, more of an athlete, working on different surfaces. So you tend not to see mechanical laminitis. The only time you see it around sort of this time, 2017, is if you have an injury to a foot and the other leg is bearing all of the weight. You've got to understand that a horse bears weight it spreads its body weight 60% in front, 40% behind. That means that both front feet are designed to take 30% of its body weight. If you have a foot that's not bearing any weight, then the opposite foot then has to do 60% of the work. You're doubling its workload. If that foot is not supported, it's standard practice in farriery. If you have a horse that's non-weight bearing, the other leg will need supporting. Otherwise, what was your good leg will rapidly become your bad leg, as you end up with what they term it these days, standing limb laminitis. Okay, and it's the leg that's doing all the work. Eventually, when these laminae fail, the bone will rotate and often come out the bottom, burst out the bottom of the foot. Okay, so that's mechanical laminitis. 2017, by far and away, the only types of laminitis we see in this day and age is systemic laminitis. And systemic laminitis is laminitis that originates from its own system. And there are many causes of laminitis, and I'm just going to deal with the main three of them today, which is fat pony laminitis, equine metabolic syndrome, and Cushing's disease. The end result is the same often, but it just gets there a slightly different way. But they're all toxins that come from within the body. So it's the body's own behaviour that's causing the laminitis, and that's called systemic laminitis. So back to sort of laminitis itself. If your horse gets laminitis, it will go through different stages. Some horses will go through several stages, and some horses will only go through a few. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly talk about each stage. The first stage is what is known as developmental laminitis, and in the developmental stage, it's the building blocks of laminitis. At this point, the horse is not lame, so no one is aware that the horse has got laminitis. So we're not going to dwell on developmental laminitis. The first time that you know your horse will get laminitis is when your horse has got acute laminitis, which is when the laminae here are inflamed. You've got the heat, you've got the pain, you've got the swelling, you've got the stance, obviously seeing your horse suffering like it is. So it's acute. It's in a lot of pain, but the bone inside the hoof hasn't moved. It's still in its original position. Once the bone inside the hoof starts to move, it leaves the acute phase and it enters the next phase, which is acute founder. For me, acute laminitis is the cliff edge. If you can prevent your horse from going to acute founder, your horse generally will make a full recovery. No matter how much pain it looks like it's in, and no matter how much suffering, once the cause is removed and the vet has done what the vet does and reduced as much as they can, once the inflammation then starts to die down, your horse will go sound, and because the bone's not moved, it should make a full recovery. What happens, certainly from my point of view as a farrier, sort of 2 trims down the line, what I'll start to see is that when I'm doing a trim, I'll start to see serum and blood appearing in the white line, and all that is the serum that's sat in the wall here, and you just got to wait for it to grow out, and everything growing behind it will reattach itself normally, and the inflammation will go down, and the horse will make a full recovery. Once it founders, so once this bone moves from this position and rotates downwards, that's the cliff edge. That's the point where things rarely ever get back to the way that they were. That's when the prognosis reduces greatly. Serious farriery intervention and veterinary intervention are required, and the horse's life, there's no nice way of putting it, the horse's life truly is in danger. Which brings me on to a point that I do want to make. Laminitis is a clinical emergency, and it must be treated as a clinical emergency. Some of the bigger horses can founder and rotate within a couple of hours. Okay, so you often don't have very long. If you suspect it, don't phone your farrier, phone the vet and ask for an emergency appointment. Mention you suspect it's laminitis and insist the vet is there as soon as possible. Okay, so back to our stages again. So once this bone inside the hoof starts to rotate, then the horse becomes acute founder. Founder meaning that the bone is moving in the hoof. All the time that the bone is moving inside the hoof, you've got a massive amount of instability in the hoof. Okay, it's in the acute founder phase. Once the bone stops rotating, so what will happen is the vet will take x-rays every other day or wherever it is. Once they get 2 x-rays where the bone is still in the same position, then it stops being acute and it moves on to the next phase, which is chronic founder. There are two types of chronic founder, type 1 and type 2, which we're not going to go into today. It's more of a farriery, veterinary discussion more than it is farrier horse owner discussion. Don't need to patronise you, but it would make the video, I'd have to use language that you wouldn't understand, and it would make the video about 3 hours long. So we'll leave that. The horse will go into the chronic phase, and the chronic phase is the bone is incorrectly orientated in the foot. It's not in the right place. Some horses that are chronic, when all the inflammation dies down, can be, I'm not saying that they're sound, but they can be comfortable, they can be okay. Some more than others, it depends on several other parameters within the foot, but they can be okay. And it's the chronic phase, and it's the bit where you look at your horse's feet and everyone can tell that your horse has had laminitis. The feet go really ugly and blocky and bulky, and what's happening is you're starting to get long-term changes to the feet because its anatomy is not in the right place because of the attack of laminitis. It's a farrier's job and the vet's job and the skill of your farrier to then try and return the foot back to normal. It's possible in some cases, less so in other cases, but it does depend on certain clinical things within the foot. So they're the 3 main stages, and then there's a 4th stage known as sinker. The sinker phase, or a horse that sinks, is what happens is the bone, instead of rotating downwards, the whole bony column will sink inside the foot. As a general rule, and it is a general rule, it's not in all cases, heavier horses tend to sink rather than rotate. Horses that sink tend to have a poorer prognosis. They're much more difficult to save than horses that rotate. The rotators are hard enough, sinkers are even worse. And what happens is the whole bony column will sink in the foot, and that happens because you get detachment from heel. I'll use this one, sorry, excuse me. You get detachment of the wall from heel all the way around the hoof to the other heel. On founder cases, you generally get detachment here in this area only, sort of around the toe area, and the reason it detaches here is because this tendon directly opposite it is constantly pulling down, so the shear force is much stronger directly opposite that tendon. And I liken it to a tug-of-war match. If you imagine a tug-of-war match, on one side you have team deep digital flexor tendon, on this side you have team laminae. Each member of the team have 5 members. They all have exactly the same strength and exactly the same stamina. So you take up the strain, pull, what happens? Nothing, because each team cancels each other out and the rope remains in the middle. If I go over to Team Laminae and I pull a member of Team Laminae out, what will happen is Team Deep Digital will start to win the pull and the rope will slowly start to move this way. If I go and pull another few members of Team Laminae out, Team Deep Digital will win quite quickly. And that's, I know it's very crude and basic, but that's basically what's happening in the foot. As these laminae start to fail, the deep digital flexor tendon will pull upwards at the back and it will rotate the bone downwards into the foot. With a sinker, you get detachment from heel all the way around to the other heel, and the whole bony column sinks in the foot, and that's known as a sinker. Like I said to you, heavier horses tend to suffer from sinker. So that's just a quick classification of the different types. We have developmental, we have acute, that's when there is inflammation but there is no bone movement. We have acute founder, when the bone is rotating inside the foot. When it's actively rotating, it's acute founder. When it rotates and stops, it becomes chronic founder. There's type 1 and type 2, which we're not going to go into. And then finally, sort of standalone, is a sinker. So a horse would go acute and then sinker. Some horses will go acute founder and then go sinker. Every horse is different, and the way that they go differs greatly, and it's what makes this disease so difficult to treat. So that is what the classifications of laminitis. I'm just going to pull a drawing that I've done, and I just want to show you diagrammatically what we mean by this. The first thing we're going to deal with is this one here that says normal. So this, roughly speaking, is the normal orientation of the distal phalanx, or P3, or the coffin bone, inside the hoof. And this relationship between this surface of the bone and the hoof wall should be parallel to each other, and this thickness should roughly be the same all the way down. This distance here should roughly be the same as this distance here. This is known as sole depth or solar depth. interestingly, this is a parameter here, sole depth, that you lose quite quickly in laminitis, and how much sole you're left with is a big indicator of how successful you can be with your treatment. It's one thing that the vet and the farrier will look at when they x-ray your horse and they're having a discussion about the way forward and so on. So roughly speaking, this is the normal orientation of the distal phalanx. If we move to this diagram here, this now we've got the bone and it's rotated slightly down, so we're getting a bigger distance here than we have up here. It's not the best drawing, I should have sort of gone in a little bit more with my hoof. So the bone is rotated slightly down, and we no longer have this gap here is much more than this gap here. So we haven't got this nice uniform sort of gap all the way around. We're starting to lose as the bone rotates down into the foot. Again, I stress these are very basic drawings of what we mean by the terms. This one here at the top, this is chronic, okay, and this is a bit that I was saying about these ugly feet where they have really bulbous fronts here. It's called the laminar wedge. We have a big gap here where we've got a lot of necrotic tissue sitting in here, varying degrees of sole depth. We have massive amounts of heel growth. You get the big rings on them. The type of feet that your farrier has to heavily dress back with his rasp all of the time. That's sort of a chronic foot. And then this one here is the point that I was trying to make with the sinker. If you look where this is the extensor process of the coffin bone, if you look that it's slightly above the hoof capsule. If you look at this diagram here, the extensor process has now sunk down to below the level of the hoof capsule, and our sole depth here is very thin. Horses that sink, when you look at the x-ray, they often don't look like they've rotated. So you first look at them and you think, oh, the rotation doesn't look too bad because this relationship is still here. You might get a bigger distance, but actually when you measure this distance, which is called founder distance, from the top of the coronary band down, you realise that you've got a sinker. So very basically, that's what we mean when we use the word normal, founded, chronics and sinkers. Okay, so we'll leave that as it is. So, right, first aid. So first thing I want to talk about is first aid, and what can you do if you suspect your horse has got laminitis. Remember I said earlier on, horses can founder quite quickly. Every second counts. So it's your actions if you suspect laminitis are really important. First things first is, if you know what the cause is, then you need to remove the cause. And by that I mean your horse has broken out of its stable, it's got into the feed barn, it's eaten a whole bag of feed, all right, or it's got its nose in a bag of feed. You need to remove the potential cause, which is the bag of feed. Once you've done that, there's a few things that you can do. The next thing you need to be doing, if it's got its nose in a bag of feed and it's eaten 3/4 of a bag, you need to keep your eye on it. You don't necessarily have to call the vet out because it won't be lame at this point, but you do need to keep a close eye on it. And the moment it does start to go lame or starts to look uncomfortable, you need to get the vet out. But if you get your horse in, or for whatever reason you come up one day and it's really lame, there are a few things that you can do. The first thing, really important, is a deep bed. Okay, shavings ideally, because it will help to pack into the contours of the foot, and it'll give some support. So a nice deep bed. Another thing that you can do is get a tail bandage, rolled up tail bandage, place it down the centre of the frog, and then tape it onto the foot. And what that will do, again, it will give mechanical support to the foot while you're waiting for the vet or farrier. But like I said earlier on, it really should be the vet that you're calling, because it is an emergency, and legally it's the vet's job to first deal with this. From a farrier point of view, in the really early stages, if your horse is trimmed regularly and your horse is not due a trim or it's not due shoeing, certainly unshod horses, the farrier shouldn't really get involved unless the vet requires glue-on shoes or anything like that to be done. The best thing to do, if possible, is to just leave the feet alone while they're sore and everything's inflamed. So if your foot looks something like that, I would argue the best thing your farrier can do is nothing, because the last thing the horse wants is putting all its weight on one leg while the farrier jumps under and tries to strip all the sole out and snip all the wall off it, and you just run the risk of unstabilising an already unstable structure. So if it's not founded and it's in the acute phase and its feet are looking okay, I would argue don't do anything. The vet is the person to be called. So a deep bed, remove the cause, some sort of support, rolled up tail bandage is ideal down the centre of the frog, and tape it to the foot. and get the vet out immediately. That's the best sort of first aid advice I can give you. I do want to make a point though. If your horse is overweight and you suspect he's got or she's got laminitis, it's really, really important that you do not starve your horse. There's a condition called hyperlipidemia or hyperlipidemia, okay, and it can be fatal quickly for overweight or obese horses. Some people say, right, that's it, I've had enough now, my horse is too fat, I'm just going to starve it. What happens is, because the horse is storing so much fat, it will go into shock and the body will release the stored fat in a whanna instantly, and it rapidly overloads the body. It can overload the liver, and the horse is fatal, and the horse will drop down dead. Okay, so it's really important that you do not starve your horse. Hay is always better than haylage. Soaked hay to get rid of the sugars out of it. Just make sure something is going through the horse's system to prevent this sort of negative energy balance and this hyperlipidemia from kicking in, because it can be fatal. So they're the type of things that you can do from a horse owner's point of view before the vet arrives and the farrier arrives and the cavalry arrives and everybody starts to put fancy stuff on and everybody's fighting to save your horse's life. The hours before that, you really can intervene and truly make a difference. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are the signs. Okay, some of the signs. I'm not going to go too much into causation. I'm just going to mention the big three in a minute, but some of the signs that your horse is suffering from laminitis. The number one sign is pain, lameness. There's grades, there's oval grades for laminitis where he grades them 1 to 4, varying degrees of soreness for your horse. But all horses with laminitis will be in some sort of pain. Some will be, it will be horrendous pain, it'll be difficult to watch. So lameness is absolutely a sign. Another one is the laminitic stance, which if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you Google laminitic stance equine, there'll be 1,000 pictures come up. And what happens is the horse will push its front feet out in front of it, and it will rock back onto its heels, and it will try and shift its body weight to its back feet. It will tuck its hind feet under its belly, and what it's trying to do is shift all the way away from the painful bit, which is this bit here, the front of the hoof. Okay, and it's they call it the laminitic stance. Your horse may be sweating, it may look depressed, it will certainly look distressed. In the acute phase, there won't be very many changes to the feet. You're unlikely to see bruising in the feet at this stage. You will have an increased digital pulse and a very strong digital pulse. The abaxial sesamoid pulse, which is at the fetlock. If you don't know where to find your abaxial sesamoid pulse, the next time your farrier or your vet visits, make them show you where to find it. That will be up and it will be pounding. It will be up for two reasons. One, because of the laminitis, and two, because it's in pain and you will have an increase in blood pressure. So you will be able to feel the digital pulse. Usually, there are a few exceptions, and some horses it doesn't seem to happen with, but there's always exceptions to the rules. So the signs that you'll see in the really early days, really early hours, are lameness, soreness, sweating, depression in some cases, a reluctance to walk, pounding digital pulse, a really heavy digital pulse. It's all you're really going to see in the acute phase. In the acute founder phase, if your horse starts to founder, there are a few extra signs that you can check for. One of them is if you put your thumb on the coronary band here, do it on this one as well. If you put your thumb on the coronary band here on your horse and you press down, if your horse has foundered, there will be a depression there. When you push it in, there'll be nothing there. You'll be able to push your finger in quite far. The only way to know that is to test your horse when it doesn't have laminitis, learn what that feels like, and then when you press it in, if it's foundered, you'll notice that it's much softer there and you can push your thumb in further. What happens is the bone is rotated from this position here, okay, and it rotates, it creates a void here that you can then feel. If you can pick your horse's foot up, horses that are foundered, you may get a depression in this area here, just in front of the apex of the frog. This is the front of the frog, so in this area here you may get what we call a solar prolapse, and it can vary in degrees. It can be quite alarmingly large in severe cases to just a small little lump in the more mild cases. Okay, that is always an area and a cause for concern. Bruising in this area is also a big cause for concern. So they're some of the signs that you can see. Again, I'm mindful that I don't want to overload everybody with information to the point where it becomes a lesson rather than hints and tips. So there's some of the signs that you'll see. I just want to talk quickly about the 3 causes and try and clear up some of the misunderstandings. Fat pony laminitis traditionally was a spring disease. The grass comes through, grass creates, the more energy it gets from the sun, and I'm paraphrasing, creates sugars and fructose which are in the grass. Too much of it can cause problems, and what will happen is once the horse eats it all, inside its gut it will start to ferment. When it starts to ferment, it creates lactic acid. The acid will inflame the gut wall, it will be absorbed into the bloodstream, it then becomes toxic, and that's what interferes with the blood supply in this area. Okay, once the blood supply in the laminar bed starts to become disturbed and it's not receiving the blood, it then becomes inflamed and laminitis starts. So again, that's basic. That's the basic cycle of fat pony laminitis. The other one is Cushing's disease, okay, which is a tumour on the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is inside the brain, and the pituitary gland controls a region of the brain that produces dopamine. There's a disconnection between the pituitary gland and the production of dopamine, and it ends up with elevated levels of a hormone called ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. Elevated levels of ACTH is a sign that your horse has got Cushing's. Now, in this day and age, there's a drug called Presend, which is very good at re-establishing the connection between the pituitary gland and the hypothalamic region of the brain where dopamine is produced. Again, I'm paraphrasing greatly, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that is a cause of laminitis. This ACTH hormone will again cause an interruption in the blood supply here, and then inflammation, and then laminitis. So the result is the same, it just gets there a slightly different way. And equine metabolic syndrome is very similar to type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the body doesn't produce insulin. It does produce, the cells that produce insulin, but your own body kills the cells before they produce insulin. And the second one is type 2 diabetes, which is the lifestyle sort of diabetes. And what happens is you produce insulin, the horse produces insulin as normal, but insulin is a stimulus that tells the cells to take in sugar to burn for energy. Insulin resistance means the body doesn't respond to the stimulus, which is insulin, and you end up with too much glucose in the system, and too much glucose is toxic, and eventually it will end up as laminitis. So I hope that clears up some of the things. I know we haven't touched the sides when it comes to laminitis. I just wanted to do a video without going into farriery and veterinary and all of that sort of stuff about what these words that you may come across mean and what will happen in the early stages of your horse getting laminitis. As always, leave a question in the comment below and I will endeavour to answer it for you best I can. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.